Genesis 29 1-32, through the Bible. Chapter 29. Theme: Jacob meets Rachel. Jacob serves for Rachel. Jacob is deceived. Over this chapter I would like to write, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." Galatians 6:7-8. Probably the title that we ought to put over this chapter is "Chickens Come Home to Roost." In the beginning of this chapter we will see that Jacob begins to reap the harvest of his evil doing. The passage in Galatians is written primarily for Christians, but it expresses a universal law of God in every age. It is true in any area of life. You sow corn, you reap corn. You sow cotton, you reap cotton. You sow wheat, you reap wheat. You sow tares, you reap tares. Examples of this principle run all the way through the scriptures. For instance, Pharaoh slew the male children of the Hebrews, and in time his son was slain by the death angel. Ahab, through false accusations, had Naboth slain and the dogs licked his blood. God sent his prophet Elijah to Ahab with the message that, as the dogs had licked the blood of Naboth, they would lick the blood of Ahab. And that was literally fulfilled. You remember that David found this to be an inexorable law which was applicable to his own life. He committed the terrible sins of adultery and murder. God forgave him for his sin. Yet, the chickens came home to roost. He reaped what he had sown. His own daughter was raped and his son slain. Even Paul the Apostle felt the weight of this law. He had given his consent at the stoning of Stephen. Later, Paul was taken outside the city of Lystra and was stoned and left for dead. Jacob is the classic illustration of this inflexible law. Jacob had lived by his wits. He was rather cocky and clever. He had practiced deceit. He would stoop to use shady methods to accomplish his purpose. And he was proud of his cleverness. But he will reap what he has sown. As we come to this chapter, Jacob leaves Bethel and resumes his journey. After a period of time, I do not know how long, he arrives in Haran. Then Jacob went on his journey, and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold a well in the field, and, lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. Genesis 29 1-3. We see here the importance of water in that country. It still is a very important item because there is a shortage of it in many places. It must be husbanded and protected. That is why at a certain time during the day the stone was removed from the top of the well, and then everybody watered their sheep, everybody got the water he needed. Then the stone was put back on to close the well. Now Jacob arrives on the scene before they take the stone away from the well. Believe me, he is as cocky as ever. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. Genesis 29 4-5. Oh yes, they knew him. But Jacob didn't know him, yet. But, oh my, Jacob is going to get acquainted with him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well, and, behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. Genesis 29 6-7. Here Jacob has just arrived in the land and he is telling them how to water their sheep and what they should do. This is typical of him, by the way. And they said, We cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. Genesis 29 8. Jacob meets Rachel. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Genesis 29 9. Rachel is a shepherdess who takes care of the sheep. This was woman's work in that day. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. Genesis 29 10. I don't know who told him to water the flock of Laban, but he did it. Jacob is not following anyone's law but his own. He made the rules for the game as he went through life, that is, the first part of his life. He has a tremendous lesson to learn, and Uncle Laban is the one to teach him. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice, and wept. Genesis 29:11. This verse has always been strange to me. Frankly, kissing that girl and then weeping is hard for me to understand. However, I am of the opinion that this boy had had a lonely trip from the moment he had left home. We need to remember that from Bethel he had to go up by the Sea of Galilee, then up into Syria. He had to cross that desert. I suppose he had many experiences along the way. When he arrived, he was very cocky and greeted the men there in a matter-of-fact way as though he had known them all of their lives. He asks them questions, then probably in an officious way takes the stone from the mouth of the well. I suppose when he greeted this girl who was a member of his mother's family he welled up with emotion and wept. That is the only way I can explain it. But I am sure that the next time he kissed her he didn't weep. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father, Genesis 29:12. You will notice that he calls himself her father's brother. The Hebrew does not make a lot of the distinctions we make today. We've got it reduced down to whether a person is a kissing cousin or not. But in that day if you were related, you were a brother. That is the way it is translated here and quite properly so. But in English we would say that Jacob was her father's nephew and that he was a son of Rebekah, her father's sister. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things, Genesis 29:13. I imagine that Jacob had quite a bit to talk about. I wouldn't be surprised to find that he entertained them at dinner with his story of how he tricked his brother to get his birthright, and how he used trickery to get the blessing, and how clever he was. Probably he told about that night at Bethel, too. He told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month, Genesis 29:14. Laban was convinced now that this was his nephew, and he says, You're my relative, so come in and make yourself at home. Now a month goes by, and notice what happens. Jacob is not working. He's a nephew from a far country, and he's come over to visit his uncle. I suppose he felt that he ought to have free room and board there. During that time he's courting this girl, Rachel. At least, he certainly has been casting his eyes in that direction. And I think she was casting her eyes in his direction, too. Now, I can imagine that it was one morning at breakfast when the next incident took place. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? Genesis 29:15. This Uncle Laban is clever. Who had said anything about going to work? Jacob hasn't. So Uncle Laban is very tactful and says that he doesn't want Jacob to work for him for nothing. He says that he will pay Jacob. Frankly, you don't live with Laban a month without making some sort of an arrangement to pay your board. Uncle Laban is a clever one also, and now he is going to deal with his nephew. And Laban had 2 daughters, the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel, Genesis 29:16. Here we are introduced to another daughter, Leah. Uncle Laban has been watching this boy, and he has noted that his nephew has become very much interested in his daughter Rachel, the younger of the 2. The next verse tells us why. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored, Genesis 29:17. Rachel was a very beautiful girl. Leah was tender-eyed, which is a way of saying that she was not beautiful at all. In college when we were reading Greek and studying some of the plays of Euripides, when a fellow wanted to say something very nice about his girl, we found in the play that he would call her cow-eyed. I always laughed about that and thought that I would turn that over in my mind before I ever considered that a compliment. Well now, the next time you meet a cow, take a look at the eyes, and you will see they are beautiful. Ever since I read that play, I have never seen a cow with ugly eyes. But Leah was not cow-eyed, she was tender-eyed, which meant that she was sort of an ugly duckling. So Laban has these 2 daughters, and it is obvious that Jacob is in love with Rachel. Jacob serves for Rachel. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter, Genesis 29:18. We find Jacob was quite moon-eyed. So that morning at breakfast, when Uncle Laban suggested he go to work, he had something in mind himself. He knew that the boy was in love with the girl, so I don't think he was at all surprised at Jacob's answer when he asked what his wages should be. Jacob was willing to work for 7 years for Rachel. This man, Laban, was driving a hard bargain. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me, Genesis 29:19. Laban accepts that bargain. Now this next verse tells us one of the loveliest things that is said about Jacob. Frankly, in the early years of Jacob's life, the only appearance of anything beautiful or fine or noble is his love for Rachel. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. Genesis 29:20. You can just see this man working. I tell you, Uncle Laban had him working hard. He worked out in the cold, out in the rain and in all sorts of weather, but he always thought of that girl Rachel. There she was to meet him after a hard day. He was desperately in love with her. And Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place, and made a feast. Genesis 29:21-22. Jacob is deceived. Now notice what Uncle Laban is doing. And it came to pass in the evening, that he took Leah his daughter, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. And it came to pass, that in the morning, behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Laban said, It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Genesis 29:23-26. At the marriage ceremony in those days, the woman was veiled, heavily veiled, so that she couldn't be seen. Poor Jacob didn't see the girl he was getting until the next morning. Lo and behold, it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah. At the moment he saw he had been tricked. I wonder if he didn't recall something of his own father when he, Jacob, had pretended to be the elder. He deceived his father, and that was the reason he had to leave home. You see, God does not approve of that type of conduct. The chickens are now coming home to roost. Jacob pretended to be the elder when he was the younger. Now he thinks he's getting the younger and he gets the elder. The tables are turned now, and it has become an awful thing for Jacob. To Jacob it is a criminal act that Laban has done, but notice how Uncle Laban passes it off. He is an expert at this type of thing. He tells Jacob that there was a little matter in the contract, a clause in the fine print, that he had forgotten to mention to Jacob. It was a custom in their country that the elder daughter must marry first, and the younger daughter could not marry until the elder daughter was married. But Uncle Laban is willing to be very generous in his dealings, so he has an offer to make. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. Genesis 29:27. This week, you see, is another 7 years. Uncle Laban is getting his money's worth, isn't he? And poor Jacob is really going to school. But he is taking 2 wives which he shouldn't have done. He will be in trouble before it is over. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. Genesis 29:28. Uncle Laban made Jacob serve twice as long as he originally agreed to. 7 years was long enough, but, believe me, 14 years is a long time. This arrangement gave Jacob 2 wives. You may be thinking, well, since this is in the Bible, God must approve of polygamy. No, God does not approve of everything that is in the Bible. That may startle you. For instance, God didn't approve of the devil's lie. God didn't approve of David's sin, and he judged him for it. But the record of both events is inspired, literally, God breathed. In other words, God said through the writer, Moses, exactly what he wanted to say. The thing that is inspired is the record of the words God gave to Moses to write down in this book we call the Bible. In Genesis 29 God gave an accurate record. Jacob did have 2 wives, and it tells us the way it came about. That is where inspiration comes in. It does not mean that God approved of everything that is recorded in the Bible. Certainly God disapproved of Jacob's having more than 1 wife. May I say to you, this man Jacob had plenty of trouble in his family from here on, and it all can be traced back to his own methods which he had used. The chickens are coming home to roost. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived, and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, Surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Genesis 29:31-32. Leah is a sad person because she knows her husband loves Rachel rather than her. When she becomes the mother of Reuben, it brings joy to her heart, and she feels that Jacob will love her now. Reuben is Jacob's firstborn, but he is not the one who will begin the line leading to Christ. Rather, it will be Leah's 4th son, Judah. Judah was the kingly line. David was in this line, and later on, the Lord Jesus himself, according to the flesh, came from the line of Judah. Reuben lost his position as the firstborn because of his sin. Levi was the priestly tribe. Leah was the mother of some of the outstanding sons of Jacob.